He gets upset when I walk away, thinks I'm ignoring him. He'll come after me.
I hear the stories about the women who are afraid to leave their partner now that he's back out.
Our goal is to try to, around reentry, to improve the chances of people staying out.
And then when he got out, I thought his life would be changed. But since he went to prison, he's become a more violent person than he was before he went. I thought he'd be a changed person. I was excited. I was about to be back with the person that I loved. For the first maybe 3 to 6 months, it was all butterflies. After that, attitude, arguments, picking, fighting, and then the abuse started again. But I didn't leave.
Despite the reasons why people get sent to prison, dealing with the issue of domestic violence is something that's real important. So you have people who've been arrested and convicted for domestic violence, but it's equally important to address the issue of domestic violence among people who are sent to prison for other reasons as well.
I know that we have a significant number of people who go back who we probably could have done the right thing for them ahead of time to have prevented the problems that lead to battery out in the community.
When conversations get real bad and arguments and tempered flare up, instead of him trying to talk it out or walk away, it becomes violent. There's kids that are involved that see it. It affects my kids and stuff.
Because kids get victimized by being exposed to it, because women or partners get injured by this, because the person who's been incarcerated that has a new kind of edginess to their life after having been there don't know how to manage themselves. They're much more likely to fail at social relationships in general. All those things are human tragedies. There isn't anything like the DVPSQ, or the Domestic Violence Problem-Solving Questionnaire. There isn't a standardized assessment that prison or parole use to assess the risk for domestic violence. And in fact, what we have is prison staff that say to us, we're worried about this guy, but we can't really point out exactly why, and there is no record of him having been arrested for domestic violence or for him having committed domestic violence in our files. But we're afraid that when he's out in the community, he's going to meet somebody new, or he'll return to a former partner, and those folks will be at risk because he's got issues.
Among the reasons why I think this instrument is important is that it may shift the attention of the prison system and the parole system to engage around the issue of domestic violence for people who've not only been convicted of the crime, but for people who were sent to prison for other reasons, but domestic violence is part of their history.
I wasn't nourished and hugged and kissed and all that stuff as a child. I started off very young with having kids, so my relationship started like at 13. If he said he loved me, he loved me. He'd hit me and then say, I apologize, I love you. So mentally, it started to feel like this was love. I didn't really know what true love was.
They've always used past history, the man's past history, to predict future behavior, just in this terms of domestic violence. In order to do that, though, it takes a great deal of resources to search case files, database, court records, social histories, sometimes victim interviews. to go back and collect all that information to fill out all the potential predictors of a man's future behavior, and it's tremendously resource intensive. Also, in doing those reviews, much of the information is missing.
With this tool, our intention is to make it less labor intensive, to be able to do an assessment that will not take forever to not only administer, but also in terms of to score. And I think that will increase the capacity to be able to get better predictions and to be able to, in the assessment process, add domestic violence to the issues that people take a look at. Now, when we've spoken about it before, typically there's housing issues, there's education, there's substance abuse, there's employment issues that get looked at. And those things increase the potential for people to succeed once they re-enter the community. We're trying to do the same thing around the issue of domestic violence.
It's really a totally different approach to measuring domestic violence for men. First of all, it's not resource intensive. It does not require extensive case database, court record, victim reviews. It can be administered in 10 minutes and scored in 10 minutes. It will give an accurate and valid, reliable measure of a man's risk of domestic violence.
The Domestic Violence Problem-Solving Questionnaire is a tool that enhances the case management planning that begins pre-release and continues through the time a person's on parole post-release.
I think one of the things that's interesting with the DVPSQ is that men are assessed based on the way that they look at the world. That's how we can tell whether somebody's high, medium, or low risk in terms of how they problem solve with these situations. It was sort of a brainchild of both Lance and I, but it really was based on earlier work that Lance did in regard to dealing with children who had conduct disorder issues.
10 years ago, I was working with an organization in Minnesota. It's called the Minnesota Council of Child Caring Agencies. They represent 95% of all nonprofit residential treatment facilities for children and adolescents in the state. They wanted an outcome tool. They wanted something that they could administer while the child or adolescent was still in the program that would give them an idea of how successful this youth would be after he returned to the community. So instead of using sort of past histories or events in these children's lives to predict, we decided we'd look at their problem-solving skills, and specifically cognitive problem-solving therapy and theory. And that gets us into a completely different realm. We're not looking at their behavior anymore. We're looking at how they think, how they process information. So we started there, and we started surveying children and adolescents in 26 different facilities throughout the state. We had a sample size of about 250. We followed these kids for 6 months after they were discharged. The follow-up was a clinical interview done by a psychologist or clinical social worker with the caregiver of the child. We asked all kinds of questions about the child's success, school attendance, any drug use, any problems in the community, any legal problems. And we kind of divided them into a group of successful kids and kids who really needed to return back to residential services, unsuccessful kids. And using the scores from the PSQ, the problem-solving question, we called it at that time, we had an 83% success rate. We could 83% of the time correctly pick which children or adolescents were going to be successful and those who were not. In the corrections programs, it was even a better predictor. It had a success rate of 92%.
I liked it when he was gone, actually. It was peaceful and quiet, serene. He comes back and, I don't know, it's like he thinks he's this big, tough person and everything has to go his way, from the time he comes in at 7 in the morning to the time he goes to work at 10 o'clock at night, it's the same routine every day. And I'm tired of feeling like a slave to him. I'm tired of trying to make everything okay.
What's different about the DVPSQ is the fact that it was shaped from listening to the voices of men in prison on parole and women in relationships to men in prison on parole.
So we designed questions that were actually suggested by men who had been in prison and had returned to the community. These questions had all had to do with challenges that they faced with their partners while they were in prison and after they returned home.
And we got information from them about what they saw as themes in terms of issues that they dealt with, and that resulted in high conflict and resulted in violence in their relationships. So what we did was we took that information and then framed it, incorporated into what is included in the DVPSQ questions.
We let the men read into the situation. And when they do that, they use their cognitive problem skills and their interpretations. They also use their past history of how situations like this have been handled before. I'm going to describe different situations and ask you to respond. Try to imagine that you're in these situations. All these situations have been identified by men who have been in prison as potential challenges for men and their partners. Okay?
Yes, sir.
The first question. While you are in prison, you find out that your partner let another man drive your car. What would you do or say?
Wow, are you serious? I would be devastated, hurt, to think that my mate would let another man use my car while I'm incarcerated.
These men also have a tendency to use coercive responses. Instead of trying to work this out, to bargain, to negotiate, instead they go right to a threat or an intimidation, and it can be verbal or physical.
We're taking 150, maybe 150 to 182 men and giving the problem-solving questionnaire to. Then what we will be doing is assessing what happens to them in a 24-month period. And what we've heard is that there's a 50% return rate due to domestic violence for men who have their parole revoked. So what we're going to do is to test out and see what the issues are with the men that are returned.
We're administering the DVPSQ to prisoners who are about to be released from prison within the next 60 days at the Pugsley and West Shoreline Correctional Facilities in Michigan. We've been making trips to Michigan and asking men to participate in the study.
One strong hand in terms of helping us to move this work is the state of Michigan. The Michigan Domestic Violence and Treatment Board, but also the Michigan Department of Corrections. Kurt's background is broad. He understands issues around social work, around substance abuse, around prisoner reentry, but also around domestic violence. And he's been working to really kind of pull those things together, and that's the kind of partner we need. I think the other thing, too, is he's been real helpful in terms of helping us identify what the challenges and barriers are, and then help to move those barriers out of the way so we can have a successful result.
I know he took anger management in prison, but I think even if you get help in prison, you still need help when you get out of prison. It doesn't just stop in prison, it continues on.
So when we have something like the DVPSQ in place, and the Department of Corrections has standardized protocols for doing interventions with people who are on parole because there's risk factors evident, then the DV shelters know they can partner with parole in a new way. And when we have at our local transition teams, which work with prisoners who are coming out, both the DV partner, local law enforcement staff, and also the parole agent making decisions about what to do to help this person re-enter in the community, we know we can create other kinds of safety nets in the community because each of these agencies can change the way they practice together.
And more men will get the help they need, and more women will be safe.
So if there's somebody who is identified as high risk for abuse, there may be more intensive approaches that you use to try to address that person and to supervise that person. But what we're saying too is that everybody needs to be given some attention around the issues of domestic violence, both in prison as well as on parole.